Good afternoon, everybody. It's Scott Harrison, Master Builders ACT. I'd like to welcome you all to today's session being put on by the ACT. Today's session is going to be the property developers licensing and the missing middle housing reform. Amy Kingham, who is the Senior Director of the City. I've got to get this right now. They've changed all the names on us again.
I know, right?
On the City and Environment Directorate. She was going to present on 2 years today, provide the information about it. What I'd like to do is just ask you to hold your questions to the end of the session, and then we can come to Amy after that. Or if you'd like to just put it in the chat box, and if we don't get to answer it through the session, we'll take it to Amy afterwards and get a written answer for yourselves from there. Now, if in lines with that, I'd like to hand across to Amy so we can start this session, which is going to be very interesting, and everybody needs to understand what it means into the future to do with the licensing of property developers. Thank you, Amy.
Lovely. Thank you, Scott, and thank you for having me today. I'm really happy to be here to share this information. So what we're going to talk about today is the property developer licensing and regulation scheme, and then the missing middle housing reform. It is a mouthful. And we'll aim to talk for about half an hour and then have some questions at the end. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on, and recognise any other people or families with connections to the lands of the ACT and region. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of the city and this region. I'd also like to welcome any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today. So just a recap and an overview on the Property Developers Act 2024. So the Act was passed last year in June. It introduces an Australian first licensing scheme for individuals and entities that are doing residential development in the ACT, and it places the developers in the regulatory chain of accountability for building work. So the same regime that applies to builders now applies to developers. And the aim of the Act is to reduce the risk of building defects and non-compliance, and it will be regulated by the ACT Construction Occupation Registrar. And the framework will establish powers to facilitate administration and enforcement of the scheme by the registrar. So if you wanted to take a look, it's up on the legislation register. I can have a little browse through the Act. And just a general project update. I know we've done a series of presentations to the MBA, so where we're up to at the moment. The Minister has agreed to a staged commencement of the developer licensing scheme. So it will open for applications from 1 October 2025, so in a couple of weeks, and then it won't become mandatory for another 12 months. So that's 1 October 2026. So you've got 12 months to get sorted and get licensed for next year. And the Minister has approved Equifax. They're an independent rating entity to undertake assessments and prepare ratings reports. So when you're applying for a licence, you need to attach a ratings report. So you need to factor in time ahead of it to get that report from Equifax, and then that will be used by the registrar in their decision making on a licence and any conditions that might apply. So the Minister's just approved the Code of Practice, so that's up on the legislation web page too. So the code's more about behaviours and industry best practice, so about how we engage with consumers, how we share information, work health and safety, those sorts of things. So you can have a look on the legislation register for that one. The Minister's also agreed to the fee structure, so that was shared a couple of weeks ago with industry stakeholders. And so what that fee structure will do is will pay for the administration and the delivery of the scheme. So I'll share some more information on that coming up. And then finally, the licence application process and online tools and platforms are all being tested by Access Canberra, ready for 1st of October this year. So the whole thing will go live, for 1st October this year, and then we can make any refinements as we need to over the next 12 months. So just as mentioned quickly on the project timeline, so the Act commenced last year. Then from 1st October this year, we'll start accepting applications, and then we've got that 12-month period. So we want to really work with industry over that time just to iron out any wrinkles and any problems and try and make it as smooth as possible on both sides. And then from 1 October 2026, that's when it becomes mandatory to have a license at certain stages of the development process, which I'll go through as well. So the key question is, when is a property developer license required? So from 1 October 2026, if you're engaging in any of these development activities, that's when you'll need a license, and it applies to construction projects with 3 or more residential dwellings. So if you're applying for a development approval, if you're applying for a building approval, commencement notice, or certificate of occupancy, and then if you're selling or advertising residential property off the plan. So if any of these steps occur after 1 October 2026, you need to be licensed. If it occurs before then, you don't need to necessarily have a license. The property developer regulation, that's just gone up to the minister, and we're hoping that it'll be signed in the next few days to start on the 1st of October. So that includes some of the key elements for the implementation of the scheme. So it includes just some clarifications around the license application and renewals about what people need to provide. So the applicants will need to provide the director identification number for any directors, details of associated entities, and then if they're a community housing provider, just to provide that registration. Importantly, in the regulation, there's a few exclusions. So we want to make sure it's really targeted at those developers and it doesn't sort of go down the line. So if you're a professional, consultant, subcontractor, employee, so that lower level, those people will be excluded from licensing and personal liability. Certifiers, which have a key role in the scheme, but they're excluded from being licensed, financiers and liquidators. And then if for properties that are off the plan, it's only the first point of sale that will be captured. So I know that they can get on-sold multiple times before someone moves in. So it's just that first sale that we're capturing. And then the last one there is owner builders. So if it's your main home or extra residence. So that sort of ties into the 3 dwellings and above as well. Still on the regulation, the directors of registered community housing providers are excluded from the director liability provisions, just recognising most of them are volunteers and sort of for a social enterprise purpose, so not necessarily for that development purpose. Then on the regulated residential buildings, we're excluding retirement villages where it is an approved aged care provider and they've got that public benevolent institution status. So I know there's been a bit of discussion in that space about aged care and retirement village. So I've just drawn the line there where it's a registered aged care provider and you've got that public benevolent institution status. So anything else will need to be licensed and registered. If you sit in that bucket, then you don't need to be. And the final thing in the reg, we've got all developers, including the government, must follow the code of practice. So as mentioned, the code of practice has those behaviour standards, which are pretty common sense and apply to all regulated residential development. All right, onto the licensing application process. So this shows the steps that will need to be followed to get a licence approved. So the first step is to get a ratings entity report. So at the moment, we've just got Equifax approved as a provider of getting those reports. So it's a matter of hopping on their website and just requesting a standard report. So nothing above and beyond at this stage. And then it'll be onto the Access Canberra website. They've set up their form for the license application. So it's sort of, company name and address, all those usual sort of details, and then attaching the ratings reports. There'll be a few declarations there because under the legislation, there's a few things that the registrar needs to confirm. So a lot of that is sort of through a stat dec process for the person that's applying to make those attestations. The application will be assessed by Access Canberra, whether against the requirements of the Act, and then a licence offered. It may or may not have some conditions, just depending on what's in the application, and then licence granted at the end of that process. Just quickly on ratings entities. So there's one approved provider, which is Equifax, And you'll see the web link there. It's just Equifax and then /ICERT ACT. So they've set up an ACT portal for people to jump on and have a look at their ratings report process. So people are welcome to have a look at that and make a start, and they're really happy for any inquiries as well. And Equifax will be running, they've run a couple of webinars in the past, and they'll keep running those every month or so just to get everybody on board and to address any questions or teething issues that may happen. On the online form, there'll be a suitable person declaration. So this links back to the legislation. These are all the things that the registrar needs to check. So when you're applying, just need to provide information on this. A lot of it will be drawn from the ratings report, so that'll be a really useful tool. And then there'll be a few little tick boxes to report anything additional there. Onto the code of practice. So as I said, that's on the legislation register, which is legislation.act.gov.au. So you can have a little bit of a look at that. That's going to commence on 1 October 2026. So not this year, it'll commence next year, but we've put it up on the legislation website. So you can just start having a look and seeing what's in there. But as I said, it's based on best practice industry behaviours. So legal compliance, capacity for developments, transparency, so being really open with the customers, having quality assurance processes in place, having conflict management and complaints processes, communicating with all stakeholders, and then record keeping. So it's nothing that's sort of too revolutionary. It's sort of best business practices, but we've published that already. So if people getting ready for the code to commence, it's sort of just over 12 months till that starts. So if there's any bits of those compliance processes that stakeholders need to have a look at, you've got 12 and a bit months to get that sorted. On to fees and charges. So that was published a couple of weeks ago. In the fee structure, it's based on a cost recovery basis. So what the fees are paying for is there's a small team at Access Canberra that's going to manage this process, also the IT forms and those sorts of builds in the background. So that's what the fees are paying for. Some of the principles are that if it's a bigger development, you'll pay more fees. So that's sort of relative to size and risk. And yeah, just trying to have sort of low as fees as possible on those smaller developments, because we are aware of the overlap with the missing middle. So we don't want the two things to operate at opposites. So the fee types here, we've got the application fee. So it's when you're applying for the license. The license can be up to 7 years. So that'll be a one-off fee of $1,000. And then there's the annual fee, the term fee. So that's every year, which is $1,000 as well. And then there's the activity-based fee. So that's the fee per dwelling that I mentioned. So if you're building a bigger development, it'll cost more. So that'll be $500 per dwelling. And that'll be at the building approval stage, so towards the end of the process. This slide here has just got a few examples, so sort of showing on that smaller scale, if you're building 4 townhouses, the fees are sort of $5,000, which is a small percentage of the cost of works. And then if you've got sort of that medium-sized development onto that larger size development. So trying to keep the fees as low as possible to cover the costs of delivering the scheme, and then scaling those fees up. If you've got a larger development, sort of can hopefully pass those fees on or decide how you want to manage that in that process. But just hopefully only a small percentage of the total development. Just wanted to let people know that we've updated our website. So if you go to the planning website, which is planning.act.gov.au, and just type in property developer licensing, it'll come up pretty easily. And we put a lot of information there. So hopefully if there's questions in the back of your mind, there hopefully will be an answer on the website, but feel free to shoot through anything that we've missed. We've put a whole lot of frequently asked questions there, but if there, as I said, if there's anything else or any gaps, we'll just be constantly updating that as we implement the scheme. So if you pull up the website, it's got the licensing requirements, it's got the fees, it's got what the registrar will be doing. There will be a public register of people that are licensed, so people can check, consumers and certifiers. It lists out the obligations on licensees, and then it's got the link to the ratings entity. So if you can't find the Equifax link, it's on our website too. And then, yeah, as I said, lots of frequently asked questions. So who needs to be licensed? When do you need to do it? How much does it cost? And those sorts of things. But yeah, let us know if anything's missing and we'll keep updating that as we implement. So on to next steps there. So just a few little bits to finalise before 1st of October. So the Minister's got the property developers regulation, so we're expecting him to sign that off this week. We've got the application portal on Access Canberra, so that's ready to go, ready to launch. And then over the next few months, we'll be running some more industry sessions, and we want them to be more practical sessions, so to be a drop-in session over the next few months. So we'll advertise those once we've got some dates, and then hoping for people to come in if they've got questions, and we'll have Access Canberra there as well, hopefully, and just so can step people through and just really help people to get this system underway. And then the last thing there we'll be working on is the infringements notice regulation, which will come later in the process. So that's all we had on property developers. Do we want to go with questions now, Scott, or wait to the end, or I'll move on to missing middle?
Thanks, Amy, on that side. I've just got for the part that I've heard quite often, and you might be able to answer for me on these ones, is the timelines, or we're talking here, and we'll save it to the end a lot more, the timelines on how long it takes to have the ratings approved by Equax, and how long it's going to take to go through the department to get approval process on there. That's one question that has come up regularly and asked that part is what the timeline. So that might be one. But if that one's from everybody else's, we'll just hold off and let A finish the missing middle, and then you can hit her with all the type of questions you want to do to cover both areas. Thanks, Owen.
Yeah, I'll quickly just touch on the timeline. So with one of the steps that I mentioned is the applicants will need to get a ratings report. So we're encouraging people to do that early. So you can do that today or, over the next few months on the Equifax website. And when we sign them up to be our ratings entity, we've also set some service standards. So they estimate that a regular application, if the applicant provides all the information that's required up front, they estimate sort of 2 to 4 weeks to provide that report. But we've set an outward standard of 10 weeks for them to provide. So that includes some back and forth of requesting further information, and just say if it's a more complex development, we've given that extra time there. And then when it comes back into Access Canberra, they've got a service estimate of about 6 weeks. But once again, when you provide all the information, if everything's there up front, they're not anticipating that it'll take too much longer than that. But similar to DAs, if there needs to be a bit of back and forth of requesting information or clarifications, that'll take a bit more time. But yeah, as I said, sort of maximum time for ratings report is 10 weeks, and then Access Canberra sort of about that 6-week mark. So a couple of months all up, and it should be quicker if everyone's got the information up front. All right, I'll keep moving on to missing middle housing reform. So that's another really exciting project that we're working on in our division. You've probably seen it a lot in the media as well. And I'll start by pointing people to the consultation website. So that's the Your Say website, so yoursay.act.gov.au. And if you search up missing middle, that's got all the project documentations, including the proposed major plan amendment to the territory plan. So that's probably a good point to look at first. It's just got all that detailed information. So have a look at that website. So missing middle housing reforms, it all comes back to the government's commitment to enabling 30,000 new homes, which is aspirational by 2030, which will be a pretty hard slog to get there, but we're working all across government to achieve that. And we're wanting those homes to be well located, so close to services, transport and facilities. So instead of endlessly doing our greenfield developments, trying to get the houses closer to the middle of town where people also want to live. So with the missing middle housing reforms, it's really been looking at removing those barriers, because we know it's quite difficult at the moment even to do dual lockies and to split blocks, those sorts of things. So looking at terraces, townhouses, multi-occupancy dwellings, mainly in the RZ1 and RZ2 areas. So what we're looking at is changing the territory plan through a major plan amendment, and there'll also be a missing middle housing design guide. So we want the houses to be well located, but we also want them to, look really nice and fit in with the neighbourhood. So that guide will provide those sort of guidance on design features and character, and so wanting them to fit into the streets and the neighbourhoods. And if you have a look at that Your Say website, they've actually put up some streetscapes, so some before and afters of some really good design features. So it sort of fits into the neighbourhood, which is what we're after. So looking at the RZ1 and RZ2 zones, we really want that renewal in the neighbourhoods while respecting the neighbourhood and the landscapes. Looking at building heights for all the zones will be in the policy. So looking at changing the heights in metres in the technical specification. Minimum block sizes is what we're looking at for 2 dwellings, no longer specified. Looking at minimum number of dwellings per block, so that's sort of guided by the site context, block size, location, those sorts of things. And then allowing that subdivision as well, whether the additional dwellings have been lawfully constructed. Another thing we're looking at is consolidations. So just looking at those limitations that are currently in place and the planning outcomes we're wanting to be achieved. But more broadly as well, looking at the RZ3, 4 and 5 building height rules. So just looking across all those residential zones. Over the last few months, you're probably well aware, we've had lots and lots of industry engagement on the Missing Middle Reform project. So we've been engaging with Urbis and Stewart Architecture, who have just designed the draft design guide. And there's all those materials that I mentioned on the website as well. So there's been a technical advisory group, the practitioner groups, the ACT government architects been really involved as well. We've been engaging with across the construction industry. So yeah, master builders, property council, architects, planning institute, housing industry association. So all across the board. You're probably sick of hearing from us, but we're trying to get out to as many people as possible. Just generally across the board, there's been a high level of support for the concept, so wanting to get more houses in good locations, and just, yeah, what changes can we make in the planning system to make it happen? There's been in all the consultation feedback, but yeah, lots of support, but lots of challenges as well. So the interest rates, construction costs, lease variation charge has come up a lot, existing lease conditions, and just the regulatory environment providing a barrier. So that's everything that we're looking at from the engagement. So looking at the key areas of feedback, so where we're up to in the engagement process is the engagement's all closed now, and the team's looking at putting together the listening report, and there's been lots of consistent themes over the time. So lots of support for different housing types, for different life stages, looking at alternatives to urban sprawl, so people wanting to live closer into town centres and civic. Desire for subdivision, so looking at that separately titled dwellings rather than unit titled dwellings, so splitting those blocks has been really attractive. Concerns that we regularly hear about the traffic and the street parking. Concerns about the taxes, so that's, yeah, lease variation charge and stamp duty came through. And then infrastructure delivery as well, which is front of mind. So putting more houses in existing suburbs will put pressure on that existing infrastructure. So that's a really big one. And then, yeah, amenity impacts such as character, solar and privacy. So that came through loud and clear. So next steps here. So the engagement, the Your Say website that I mentioned, the engagement there's closed, written submissions closed on 5th of August, and the team's putting together all those comments. If you have a look on the Your Say website, all the submissions are published, so you can have a look and see what everybody's said. And so what the team's doing is looking at all those comments, writing up that consultation report, and then putting any changes through the draft territory plan amendment and the design guide. So if there was, yeah, lots of support for a certain change or against a certain change, just putting those changes through as to reflect the comments as much as possible. And then it'll go through the usual major plan amendment process, such as statutory process, going to the Assembly Committee, depending whether they conduct an inquiry or not. and then tabling that in the assembly. So there'll be more opportunities to comment on the major plan amendment. And then at the same time as the major plan amendments going through, the team will be looking at the design guide, which must be considered when you're submitting a missing middle housing DA. And then once this is all implemented, the next cab off the rank is looking at a pattern book. So that's something that government committed to during the election. So it's your pre-approved missing middle designs, and then looking at how to streamline those through the planning process. So once that pattern book's established, just looking at the DA process, and if you use one of those pre-approved patterns, trying to get quicker approvals through. That's about it. So we've steamed through that. So I'm happy to take questions. Stop sharing.
Thanks, Amy. Yep, I'll just ask you to stop sharing screens now for ourselves, and that is, I'd just ask you if you could just raise your hands and then come off mute and ask Amy the question. And if we can't answer it, and as Amy said a moment ago, if we can't answer it, we'll take it on notice and we'll get an answer going to the government through Amy and get a formal response back to yourselves. I'll start the last question on the, open up on the first ones. I'll go for this one, Amy, on that side. The design guide. Timeframes and when is it anticipated to be available to help with missing middle?
Yeah, I think I'll have to take that one on notice because the team's looking at it at the moment, but because we got so many submissions during the public consultation process, they're really carefully considering those and sort of weighing up all the different comments, pros and cons. So I'll get back to you on that one.
No, thanks for that one. Now that's when I'll turn to the audience and people online. If you've got a question, just please raise your hand and then just come up and ask the question. If you don't want to, just stick it in the chat and we'll take it from there. So let's start with that one. Who would like to go first? It's scary when nobody wants to jump in first, Amy, on that side of it.
That's okay. I'm not too scary. But if people think of questions too, they can always shoot them through to Scott or through our website or on the planning website on the developer regulation page. We've got our contact details for our team. So it's a really long email address, so it's probably best to look on the website. It's EPSD Consumer Protection Policy. So you're happy to get those comments either through Scott, or if you think of something later on, always happy to take it through to our team inbox and reply as soon as we can.
Hold on. I do have one, Amy, on that side. We did mention in the code of practice. What is the anticipated? Are you going to, I'll say from the part from CED, are you going to run a set of education things about the code of practice, or is it more on just have people have to read online to work out what they have to?
Yeah, it is available online, and it's fairly detailed. And as I said, it's mainly based on behaviours, which a lot of people should already be aware of. So industry best practice behaviours. But we will be running industry sessions over the next few months just to respond to these sorts of questions. So if people have any questions on the code, happy to answer those anytime and also through email. But I'll probably point people to the legislation website to have a bit of a look through. And I think, it is fairly self-explanatory, but happy to answer any questions that come up about it.
I'll turn back to everybody else. If there's questions on it, I'll give you a minute or so. Amy's here, she's put time out, so if you've got something that's grabbing your attention or you'd like a little bit more guidance on, just raise your hand and bring it forward for us. And I'm looking at how nobody's sticking up on that side, so in lines with that, Amy, I might finish up early with the team and everything else. My part is thank you very kindly. Thank you for making yourself available. You have given us the information about what is happening with the property developer's license. So everybody understands it does commence initially on the 1st of October 2025 with full implementation by the 1st of October 2026 to go. That leaves one question that I'm just thinking about here, as I said it there, Amy. If they're doing a build between now and then, before the 21st of October 2026, should they get a license now or wait until getting closer to the 2026 mark?
Yeah, well, For 1 October 2026, we'd encourage people to think a couple of months ahead of that date. So if you need to get that ratings report, if you don't already have one, sort of start thinking about that mid next year. And we'll be doing some communications out there to remind people of that, just to give yourselves time. Because as Access Canberra keeps saying, we don't want you to turn up on 30 September next year and then expect to have a license on the 1st of October. So just really encourage people to give themselves enough time. So giving the month or so to get that ratings report, and then giving Access Canberra enough time as well for that to start. So encourage people to start early so it's sitting there and it's ready to go. But as we said on one of the earlier slides, it only really gets triggered if you take one of those steps after 1st of October 26. So that's your DA or your BA, or you're selling off the plan. So I guess having a look at your developments, seeing how they're tracking. If you're going to finish everything off before then, you don't really need to engage on that project, but if it's going to lag over the 1st of October next year, you're probably best off registering and getting sorted.
Thank you. Because that's one question that keeps coming up, Amy. That particular point is on the completion time, and it might just need for yourselves as a point is be a little bit firmer, a bit more heavier on the guidance coming out to everybody about if you are going to go past the 1st of October and you've met those obligations underneath being 3 developments on one side on those parts, it is strongly recommended and potentially required to have your developer's license in place.
Yeah, and that'll be the focus of our comms, as I said, sort of mid next year, because you don't want to be lodging a DA, 2nd of October 2026, and you don't have your license. That's just going to hold everything up. So that's part of our plan, sort of mid next year, just to pop up again and just remind people to have a think about it.
Thank you on that one. That takes us through that particular on the property developer's license. If you got the questions, please drop them through to MBA or jump onto the CED website and put it in there, and we'll get the answers back to you. And then moves on to the missing middle. It's coming, people. Jump on board and let's see what we can get improvement and more information's going there. Along Amy, I'd like to thank you. If there's no questions coming through from the group, I'd like to thank you very kindly. Thank you for putting your time out, giving us the presentation to go with it. Your slides are appropriately, I can pass them on to the members if they wish them on that side.
Yeah, I'll send them through. There's been a couple of minor updates from the last round, so I'll send those through to you.
No problems. Thank you, Amy. I'll make them available to the members. And if they've got questions based on that, we'll let them come back to ourselves or to you to get an answer from there. But on that, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you kindly for being engaging with us. And if you have them, please come forward from there. Amy, thank you very kindly. And we'll let you have a good time back. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.